Hello, my name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents. Right now, I'm not going to be talking about American presidents, but I'm going to be talking about passing, passing, which is sort of related to the anti-miscegenation laws that I've been discussing in earlier videos. I did a video about McLaughlin versus Florida, which ended. Um, it ended. That was in 1964. Ended um, the laws against interracial cohabiting, and then Loving versus Virginia, which uh, said anti-miscegenation laws preventing interracial marriages were unconstitutional and violated the 14th Amendment. Of course, there had been a lot of interracial um, relationships, and there were very many mixed race children as a result of slavery in the South. Even though it was, there were anti-miscegenation laws, we all know of our president, third president, Thomas Jefferson, and, his interracial relationship and offspring through his slave, his black mulatto. Mulatto is a derogatory term, so I'm not going to use that, but his mixed race or black um, slave woman, Sally Hemings. Of course, Jefferson never acknowledged the children. We only know today due to DNA research. We did have a vice president who openly acknowledged his relationship with his cohabitation and relationship with his black slave, and he acknowledged the daughters, the offspring she had for him through that relationship, of course, and that's Vice President Richard Mentor Johnson, who was vice president to Martin Van Buren. Um, so, there have been, so today what I want to quickly do is discuss passing, right? Um, there's always rumors, rumor, hearsay about even some black, even some American presidents who supposedly had been passing and had black blood. For instance, Warren G. Harding, um, our 29th president, right, is said to have passed. Is said to have been a black person who was passing. But subsequent DNA research on his, after he died, it was discovered, that he was completely white, over 97%. Which human beings, you won't find a complete. When DNA research is done, no one's going to come out 100%, but at 96%, then there's no substantial black ancestry in him. It was over 96% of whatever, when he did research on his corpse. Um, so not quite. We haven't quite had a president that passed. We've only had one black president, and of course that's Barack Obama, and that's because he had a uh, a Kenyan father, a black African father. Now, recent research suggests that through his white Kansas mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, he probably did have uh, uh, a black ancestor that's by the name of John Punch, and so that would have been a case of someone who passed, so someone indicating that someone would have passed and entered uh, the white population in Barack Obama's family. That's his maternal white family. And this appears to be very common. If you're close to African Americans, you find many who tell you that, well, that they had family who passed. I have Black American friends who've told me that they've had family who passed. And what happens is, like, they just go away and they leave their community completely, they leave their family completely, and they move up north and they mingle, start passing as a white person, have a new identity, and marry into the white community. Uh, Recent research, these ancestry apps and tools like 23andMe suggest that 4 million, about 4%, and that's roughly 4 million of the white population has African ancestry, right? Even though amongst white people who self-identify as white, who by phenotype they look white, but that they do have African ancestry, and that's because a substantial amount of black people who looked white, black slaves who looked white, uh, successfully passed and integrated, assimilated into the white community, right? Um, it is estimated that amongst the black population, between 38 to 62% of black Americans have family that have passed successfully who went over to the white community and were passing off as white people. Between 1880 and 1914, during the period of the Jim Crow era in the South, it is estimated that about 19% of black males successfully passed as white people and took on new identity and mixed into the white population. It's also estimated that around that time, from the 1910s, around that period, from that period 1910s, about 30,000 blacks successfully passed as white people and were assimilating into the white community, and so passing for white people, they were blacks, because remember, because of anti-miscegenation laws and the partus uh, partus sequitur ventrum laws. I've done videos discussing this, and the law of the one drop rule, which is a hypodescent rule. Hypodescent means that when there's a mixed, when there's a mixed race child, a mixed race person takes the racial identity of the socially subordinate um, ethnic group or race, right? So black and white, they mix. In America, the black people were racially subordinate due to slavery, right? So they identify as black. So for instance, even though the hypodescent and one drop rule is now illegal, it's been abrogated, but we still do it psychologically, subconsciously, in practice in society. Barack Obama is half white, half black. He's considered black, not white, or he's considered black, right? Um, so because of the one drop rule, it meant that so long as a black person, as an individual, an American person had black ancestry, one drop rule, they were black, and the anti-miscegenation laws prohibited them from intermarrying with white people. It was a felony in the South in Jim Crow states. It was a felony in Virginia. It was a felony to have interracial sex or interracial marriage. Um, that's why I'm going to quickly discuss two cases of people who had been passing, women who had been passing, and their cases went to court to have the marriages invalidated. That's black women who had passed for white and they'd been married to white people, and then the courts had the marriages invalidated. Um, so before I also mention, I remember when I did Harlem Renaissance, I'd learned about a woman called Anita Hemmings, I think was her name, Anita Hemmings, who had been passing. She was a black woman. Her family was black, and she was the first, black person to go to school at Vassar College. She graduated in 1897, but they had assumed she was a white person. The school authorities, her school never got to know she was white until just a few days before her graduation ceremony. A family had found out, but the school still let her graduate anyway. So they found out that she was actually black. The family was black, but she had been attending. Her records showed she was white. Everybody thought she was white, and she was a great student. So her name's Anita Fleming. She went on to become a librarian, a great librarian. But so this was the stigma, it stripped the black community of dignity. It stripped, children born into a mixed relationship. It stripped them of humanity and dignity. And this was the case. Now, I'm just going to quickly talk about two cases. One was Kirby versus Kirby in 1921, an Arizona case. So Joe Kirby went to court asking that the court should annul um, his marriage to his wife, uh, May Ellen Kirby, because she had Negro ancestry, and it was illegal to have, to anti-miscegenation was illegal in Arizona. So the judge basically had a physical observation, observed the physical, her phenotype, physical characteristics, and determined that she was indeed mixed race, and the marriage was annulled. Um, there was also a case of the monk's estate. This was a California case. So there was a man called Alan Monks. He had been married to Marie Antoinette Monks. Marie Antoinette had been passing for white. But so he left two wills. The reason why the issue of the invalidation of the marriage came to be was because there were two conflicting wills. So Alan Monks, of course, he was deceased. He had an initial will in which he left he left the estate to his friend Ida Lee. However, after he got married to Marie Antoinette, Lee, who passed for white, but she had black ancestry, but it wasn't observable. Um, this was discovered, and then Ida Lee sued that the marriage was invalid, and so she shouldn't get the estate. So so if it was the lawyers, the lawyers for Marie Antoinette monks argued that the law was unconstitutional and burdened her liberty interest, right? Her liberty to marry, because it would prohibit her from marrying, because they acknowledged that, okay, she did have African Negro ancestry, right? By the way, the way the judge determined was he used a surgeon's um, uh, the expertise of a surgeon, right, to examine her anatomy, right, and so they determined that she indeed had Negro ancestry, even though uh, anthropologists and biologists who testified in court said that no, this was not a reliable way. It was not physical characteristics were no way to be able to determine the race of someone. But the judges, in any event, concluded that Marie Antoinette uh, monks did have African ancestry. So, so the San Diego Superior Court invalidated the marriage, right? So she couldn't get the estate of her late husband. She appealed it and tried to take it all the way to the Supreme Court. Lawyers argued that dubiously, her lawyer said, well, that the law was on the anti-miscegenation laws in Arizona. Arizona is where Marie Antoinette monks and Alan Monks had been married, right? Uh, so the lawyers for Marie Antoinette monks argued that the law, was unconstitutional because it prohibited um, Marie Antoinette from ever marrying, right? It would mean, because since she was mixed race, they argued that she was she was prohibited from marrying somebody who was black, was Malay, or any other things, because because she presented as white, her body presented as white. Um, and I'll address that. But something that the lawyer doesn't recognize, the lawyer refused to recognize, was the fact that of the one drop rule. The one drop rule said, well, it doesn't matter if the person presents white, like as white, if their phenotype presented as white, so long as it was known, so long as they had one drop of African ancestry, anybody in the ancestry tree was known to be black, then they were black, right? They were not white. But the lawyers seem to be making an argument that because they appeared to be white, if they married a black person or an Asian person or Native American or anybody, right, that it would be assumed it would be it would be assumed they would be violating the anti-miscegenation laws, which prohibited interracial marriage, since Marie Antoinette Monks looked white. She presents as a white person, even though she did have black ancestry. And then they said because it is known that she does have Negro ancestry, that she was automatically barred from marrying a Caucasian, a white person. So they were trying to argue that the law was unconstitutional. However, the appeals court did not buy that, saying that, well, the case, right, again, cases or controversies are the case at issue wasn't between two mixed race people, right? It was between Miss, it was the mix between um, Marie Antoinette Monks, who was mixed race, and a white person. And because she has, black ancestry, she could not marry, the marriage between her and the deceased white Alan Monks was invalid. And so they invalidated, the appellate court affirmed the invalidation of the superior court. And so, that's the sad case. So it is kind of interesting, and I'm going to continue in another, with the Loving versus Virginia case, but just to see the division, the dehumanization, right, of people with respect to race, and which prevented them from being able to exercise a fundamental right, who to marry or who to have intercourse with. And it's very interesting that in those cases, right, in the 60s and, prior to Loving versus Virginia, they don't raise the issue of privacy rights. In the more recent cases, privacy rights come up, right? Our rights to privacy, our right to a family life. But like, well, I guess because privacy normally it's left to the state because it's not stated expressly, right, explicitly in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. So I guess it's something that typically it's something that's been under the purview of the states. That's privacy. Um, so, but and something I wanted to mention, which is interesting. I remembered watching a documentary and reading articles in which Black Americans insist that J. Edgar Hoover, who was the first director of the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, everybody knows J. Edgar Hoover, and of course the longest serving director of the FBI, they claim that he actually was passing, that he was a black man who was passing as a white man. And remember, yes, about 19% of black males were able to pass between 1880 and the 1940s, right? About 19% of black males. They say, that the numbers are rather high of people, or black people who were able to pass as whites. Um, so they claim J. Edgar Hoover was someone who was passing. It's interesting, people hardly and they've all sorts of controversies about J. Edgar Hoover as well. They say he was in the closet, he was gay, because, he lived with his deputy director. They dressed alike. His name was, well, he was a white guy, Clyde, Clyde Tolson. Interestingly, when he died, he left his entire estate to Clyde Tolson, not to his family or anything like that. And so it's another reason why they say he was probably a black guy passing, because he didn't want to be associated with his black family, and his real family was always under wraps. He left his entire estate to his colleague, which is rather weird, right? So I'm going to stop this video here, and I'm going to continue about the anti-miscegenation laws. And my name is Olu Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.